talk, you can certainly ask questions on Zoom, or you can write your questions out and I'll go ahead and ask them for you. So I'll go ahead and start. So first off, good evening to everybody. Thank you for being here. Particularly during a time of social strife and social upheaval and a pandemic, and maybe it's just me that's obsessing over it, but thank you for taking time out to be here. So right on cue, I knew that was gonna happen. Okay, can you all still hear me?
I wouldn't have had it any other way, really, I'll be honest.
That is so frustrating because I really want to get up and move her, but okay. So I'm Ted Iver. I'm the executive director of the St. Louis Literary Award, which has been part of St. Louis University since 1967, which was started also by the Library Associates. And since that time, and let me get back to my place. Can you all hold on for just a moment? Unfortunately, this is being recorded for eternity, so hang on for one moment. Hey, Billy, come here. Okay, so Bradley, I'm taking the heat for you.
Yes.
We have had more than 50 exceptional writers from all over the world coming to town to accept our award and participate in events that have been held around St. Louis University. Writers like Seamus Haney, Edwidge Danticat, Tennessee Williams, Salman Rushdie, August Wilson, Chinua Achebe, Margaret Atwood. In fact, you can read about all of the writers who have been selected as St. Louis Literary Award in this, hopefully you can see this, brand new book. It's the story of the St. Louis Literary Award. It just came out, and it is by retired, and I'm putting that in heavy quotes, retired St. Louis University archivist John Wade. It is a fantastic book. It is incredibly interesting, and you can order it through SLU. So I'll put the information down in the chat box as well. But it's a terrific read with lots of fun pictures in here as well. So check that out. We also, if you're interested in joining the Library Associates, we have programs throughout the year, including our Evenings at Home series, which features writers that have some sort of Missouri connection, whether they were born here or taught here, in different locations around St. Louis. And we are rolling out some St. Louis Literary Awards swag later this year that is being created by SLU Marketing and Design student team, Tidy Projects. So that will be available for Library Associates members later this year. And the good news is like for coffee mugs and t-shirts and tote bags, we're not just gonna cross out NPR's name and put ours in, although it would save money. I think this is going to be quite neat. If you're interested in receiving more information about Library Associates, and again, I will put this in the chat box, you just contact us at the SLU Library, Donna Neely or John Wade, and again, I'll put that information in. I would also like to thank our partner, Left Bank Books, who is offering a 20% discount off of The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, so you can join us for all the book discussions that we're going to have throughout the year. So obviously, you all know that we're celebrating the 2020 Literary Award recipient, Michael Chabon, this year, who won the Pulitzer Prize, by the way, for this novel, The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. Mr. Shaden is also the award-winning novelist of books that include The Yiddish Policeman's Union, Moonglow, Wonder Boys, The Final Solution, as well as some nonfiction books like Pops, Fatherhood in Pieces, and Manhood for Amateurs, among others. Michael Chabon is also the showrunner for the new Star Trek series, Picard. He and his wife, Ayelet Waldman, who's also a writer, wrote the Netflix series Unbelievable, which is currently running on Netflix right now. And they are working on the upcoming Showtime series, The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, which is going into production this year. Tonight's lecture is the first of many we will have sprinkled throughout the year in connection with the novel. We'll have additional programming connected to Mr. Chabon's work as well. So it's another great reason to join the Library Associates and keep up to date on upcoming events. And again, these are all open and free to the public. Tonight, we're fortunate enough to kick off this Campus Read Book Talk series with Bradley Bailey, who is Associate Professor of Art History at St. Louis University. So Bradley primarily writes about artists who are involved with strategies of appropriation, which will be discussed tonight. Some people may have seen or read about exhibitions that Bradley has curated at the SLU Museum of Art or the World Chess Hall of Fame, where he enjoys working with his wife, Shannon. Bradley spends most of his time researching and writing about the art of Marcel Duchamp, who is generally credited as being the inventor of appropriation art. So with that said, please welcome my friend and SLU professor, Bradley Bailey.
Thank you so much. Yes, absolutely. I can't share my screen.
Because I haven't given you permission, but you asked so nicely that I just did it.
Perfect. Oh, let's see. There we go. Excellent. All right. Well, I know you tuned in to hear me talk about Superman and not to hear me thank people, but I didn't put this together. And I think it would be a really good idea for us to show some appreciation for the people who did. So thank you to Ted and the members of the SLU Campus Read Committee and the good people at the university libraries, admissions, student development, and alumni relations.
Do you want to watch or do you want me to go in the other room?
And of course, the St. Louis Literary Award Selection Committee and the St. Louis University Library Associates, without whom this wouldn't be possible. So thank you all, and thank you for having me and spending your Thursday evening here with me to hear me talk about a favorite topic of mine. I would never, ever call myself any kind of expert on Superman or comic book expert. I'm an art historian, and most of what I deal with is more 20th century, mostly American art that kind of deals with a sort of pop or popular kind of foundation. And but I was a comic reader and I was a comic collector when I was younger, not for a particularly long time, but long enough that I developed a real appreciation for it as an art form and for the complexity and nuance of the narratives involved in comic books. The stuff that I was reading in the 1980s, like Watchmen and stuff like that, was, I don't think we knew at the time yet maybe exactly how advanced it was, because it was a bit on the avant-garde side. But later on, I started developing art exhibitions about comic books, because now every museum's done a comic book show, and there was the big show that went to Crystal Bridges in San Francisco and the Whitney and all of that. Well, that was just recently. I'm talking about like in the early 2000s, when nobody was talking about comics and art. And well, people were, I wasn't the only one, but there weren't big shows like that. And I was putting together a concept and it didn't work out. And then years later, I saw an advertisement for a book that some German American studies professors at the University of Graz were putting together on American icons. And I thought, oh, well, I've got all this stuff I've done on Superman and Superman in contemporary art. I wonder if they'd be interested in that. And so I offered them the essay, and they were interested. And that book actually has a number of other essays on Superman. I think there's one on Lois Lane. I think there's one on Superman. But there's essays on Marilyn Monroe and all kinds of, amazing American icons. But the sort of original concept was inspired in part by this drawing here that's kind of Curtis Swan. It wasn't part of a book necessarily. It was more, can you draw Superman? Can you, sort of capture these different faces? And of course, here in this particular instance, we're taking it literally, this idea of the many faces of Superman. But to me, the many faces of Superman has more to do with the idea of the various ways in which Superman signifies from a more semiotic kind of perspective. And I'll talk a great deal more about that. But as we were getting started, because I talked to Ted about this many months ago, I just kind of threw this out. I was like, hey, you're doing this, so would you be interested in this work that I've done? And it hadn't occurred to me that this was actually something that was written quite a while ago. I checked the actual date of when it was submitted to the book, and it was 2012. And I was thinking of all the ways in which the world is different now than it was in 2012, not just within the last year, but even within the last few years. And I was wondering how relevant what I said in 2012 would be about Superman, because what this essay in a lot of ways really is about is issues of how we define heroism as a society, or how we define our idols and who to whom we look up. And I was recently, not long ago, watching a film called Batman versus Superman, Dawn of Justice, Zack Snyder film. I'm sure some of you have probably seen it. And there was a scene in it to me that really resonated, because this is a movie that's actually a bit more recent. And there's a lot of similarities between what I say in my essay that was written long before this movie came out. But one of the things that really struck me, and forgive me if the image quality is bad, this is a photograph of a TV in a movie. So if it doesn't read well, I apologize. But an individual in the film who is having trouble, a lot of people in this film are having trouble kind of reconciling this issue of Superman's kind of boundless power and how terrifying that is should it turn against America or should it turn against certain people. And someone has vandalized this statue in a place in metropolitan city called Metropolis, called Heroes Park, which looks a little bit kind of vaguely like certain elements of the Washington Mall, kind of like Maya Lin mixed with the World War II monument. And then this huge statue of this kind of kneeling figure of Superman, and he gets up on it and he spray paints false God on it. And as you can see here, it's considered to be, you know, this sort of, you know, active vandalism. But what it really made me think about was just because I teach a course called Controversy in Art. And I've been teaching this class for 15 years. I started teaching even before I got to SLU. And a topic of that course has always been monuments and public art and how these things are chosen, how they represent us, how they signify. And last time I taught this class, I think, was in 2017, when, of course, this Confederate monument was still there, and we were having long conversations about it. And at that time, we were talking about, you know, kind of timeframes of when maybe as a society or as a culture, we would start to rethink some of these things and rethink their placement. I never, ever could have imagined how quick the turnaround on some of this activity would be. I wouldn't have believed you if you had said it's going to go from all the monuments to hundreds being taken down over the course of months. I don't think I would have bought that, because I don't think I had the, you know, foresight to see necessarily what was coming down the pike. And so I think that a lot of what I bring up in this essay is actually relevant in a way that I maybe couldn't even have known 8 years ago, or however long ago this was when it was posted, because I certainly wouldn't have known about some of the changes that have taken place. I would kind of make 2016 the kind of the point at the liminal point at which things change. I don't know if anyone disagrees with that, but 2016 seems like a nice round number for our purposes. But as was pointed out, appropriation is something that's particularly important to me in what I do. Appropriation art, sort of, to kind of very generally define it, would be artists who take material from other artists or from material culture or from popular culture and incorporate it into their work, and in doing so, in representing it, add an element or add some kind of new facet to its understanding because of the particular lens through which we're seeing it. We're not seeing it through the eye of the advertiser, or we're not seeing it through the eye of the original artist. We're now seeing it reinterpreted by another artist who now adds another level of meaning onto it. It's a strategy that became very popular in postmodernism, when artists started to look at the history of art and the history of culture, not as something to overcome, or like in the, you know, sort of Picasso sense, you know, to destroy and tear apart all that's come before in a very kind of Oedipal fashion, but rather that the history of art and the history of culture is a resource to look to. And finding new ways to reinterpret what's already been done was a way of critiquing the whole idea of originality in the first place. When it seemed like everything had been done, you know, entirely white paintings and things like that, it's like, okay, we've basically taken things down to a point where there's nothing left to distill. So let's instead look at what we've already done and try to renegotiate that. And so in the case of Superman, virtually all the art that we're looking at and all the art that we're talking about can in some way be considered appropriation art, this is not this is a painting by Andy Warhol, but it's a painting by Andy Warhol of a frame of a comic book that was drawn by an artist named Kurt Schaffenberger. So, and I'm going to talk more about this painting later on. It's just I want you to have in your head as I'm talking a kind of reminder that everything that we're looking at is kind of a reprocessing of a history that already exists. It's a ready-made history, and the ready-made, that type of art was something that was introduced by the artist Marcel Duchamp. This idea of taking things from material culture and presenting them to an audience, but through this new lens. So I'm going to read a bit of this chapter that I've written, and then I'm going to look at some artwork, and we'll open things up to conversation. We'll have a good time. So to begin, we have all come to know Superman, the tireless protector of humankind, as the defender of truth, justice, and the American way. But whose America has Superman been charged with defending? Since its very beginnings, the American experience has come to be understood as something multivalent and fluid, protected by a constitution and administrative structures designed not only to absorb what is likely an unprecedented diversity of belief within a single society, but also to be capable of evolving as the nation itself undergoes its own evolution. It is therefore remarkable that the most recognizable mythic hero of a nation that prides itself so much on diversity of both opinion and racial/ethnic origin should not in some way reflect the profile and the processes of the nation more faithfully. A white male with unchecked power flying around unilaterally making decisions about what is right and wrong is about as far from the American democratic ideology as one could possibly imagine. Remember, I wrote that in 2011, and I can prove it. Of course, over his 80-year history, Superman has found himself conflicted at times, struggling over complex issues with daunting gray areas that have bested even the most open of minds. However, even if we agree with comic book writer and editor Danny Fingeroth that the superhero's values are a reflection of the values of the society that created him or her, and by necessity must also be malleable enough to absorb change within that society, it would still be the case that Superman is the defender of the majority, the mainstream. In Fingeroth's words, the hero's values are the society's values. That's not to say that the hero is Republican or Democrat, or a Christian or a Jew. But the rules, both spoken and unspoken, that we live by, the ones that say, our society isn't perfect, but it's pretty damn good, are the rules on which superheroes agree. Ironically, for a group of vigilantes, superheroes generally agree that the laws of the land need to be upheld. They believe that democracy is the best form of government. They believe in racial, religious, and gender parity. Judge each individual on his or her own merits. In other words, without being overtly ideological, superheroes champion the consensus views of most residents of Western democracies. That the iconic image of Superman has neither been understood unanimously as a signifier of the normative, nor venerated universally as a symbol of benevolence and protection is a theme that has been explored by numerous contemporary artists. For these artists, Superman has functioned more effectively due to an exceptional symbolic versatility that makes him capable of representing extremes from mainstream nationalism to outsider alienation. For by the dawn of the 21st century, Superman had developed into a highly complex signifier for a wide spectrum of social, political, and cultural groups, and their agendas both at home and abroad. Thus, Superman has represented everything from a brute enforcer of American cultural hegemony to a closeted alien other with conflicting public and private identities that closely mirror the struggle of those marginalized due to racial, gender, and sexual difference. Outside of his square-jawed good looks and Flash Gordon-inspired costume, the defender of all things status quo that we know today as Superman has little in common with the original Superman. Superman's now familiar origins bear repeating here in brief. Against a background of Depression-era breadlines, anti-Semitism, and the rising paranoia over Eurofascism in the late 1930s, Jewish Clevelanders Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster created a character from a doomed planet sent to Earth to be the, quote, champion of the oppressed, as he was described in the original newspaper strip in 1939, which we're looking at here. Living a double life as the Man of Steel, Kal-El, and meek newspaper reporter Clark Kent, Superman's adventures in the modern urban city of Metropolis, a thinly veiled but surprisingly ethnically and racially homogeneous New York City, attained unprecedented popularity, spawning not only the superhero genre, but also the now pedestrian idea of a comic book series that focuses on a single original character. Based in part on a host of influences, both traditional and modern, and these are just some of them: Flash Gordon, Tarzan, Moses, Hercules, Jesus, Doc Savage, the Scarlet Pimpernel, Gollum of Prague, Douglas Fairbanks Zorro, Buck Rogers, The Shadow, Hugo Dano from Philip Wiley's 1930 novel Gladiator, and Popeye. Not last but not least, Popeye. Superman has in turn inspired countless imitators with similar origins and double lives. At the beginning, there was little question that Superman was a force for social change. Even a small selection of storylines from the early issues of Action Comics in which Superman first appeared bears this contention out. From the seediest slums to the courtrooms of America's justice system, anyone was capable of demonstrating criminal or otherwise malevolent behavior, and Superman was neither shy nor indecisive when it came to meting out condemnations and what he considered appropriate punishments. A prime example of this unilateralist approach occurs in Action Comics #8 in a story titled Superman in the Slums. The mother of a convicted criminal pleads that her son's disregard for the law was the result of the environment in which he was raised. Superman promptly raises the slum in question and forces the government to provide low-cost, read subsidized, modern housing. Aldo Regalado, who has written extensively on Superman within the context of modern society, suggests that, quote, Superman evinced and reaffirmed the spirit of New Deal politics with its ideals of social justice. Far from being an extension of official authority and culture, Superman often worked at odds with authority figures, fighting political and urban corruption. This is far from a hip revisionist understanding of what Superman represented. Citing the superhero's lack of respect for due process in The Mechanical Bride, Marshall McLuhan, former St. Louis University professor of the late 30s and 40s, characterized Superman as, quote, ruthlessly efficient in carrying on a one-man crusade against crooks and antisocial forces. In neither case is there any appeal to the process of law. Justice is represented as an affair of personal strength alone, end quote. Mcluhan was anticipated by the more fanatical critic and folklorist Gershon Legman, who lamented in 1949 that, quote, instead of teaching obedience to law, Superman glorifies the right of the individual to take the law into his own hands. Instead of preaching the 100% Americanism that he and his cruder imitators express in hangman suits of red, white, and blue, Superman is really peddling a philosophy of hooded justice, in no way distinguishable from that of Hitler and the Ku Klux Klan. The invective expressed by Legman was but a prelude to the work that would briefly cripple the entire comic book industry, psychiatrist Frederick Wortham's diatribe about the apparent dangers that comics pose to juveniles, titled Seduction of the Innocent. Published in 1954, Wortham leveled the unkindest cut against, among others, the Man of Steel. This is from Legman. Oh, sorry, Wortham. Actually, Superman, with the big S on his uniform, we should, I suppose, be thankful that it is not an SS, needs an endless stream of new submen, criminals, and foreign-looking people, not only to justify his existence, but even to make it possible. Superman has long been recognized as a symbol of violent race superiority. Both Legman and Wortham sought to call Superman's patriotism and motivations into question by drawing connections between the alien and the Nietzschean Übermensch, the super-evolved species of human which provided inspiration for Hitler's ideas regarding nationalism and racial purity. Superman's legacy, however, proved to be indestructible as well, as these accusations failed to lessen the popularity of the superhero for subsequent generations. What emerges, however, is the fundamental paradox that is Siegel's and Schuster's response to social Darwinism. Kal-El, the alien immigrant other vigilante, I would add to that, which was not in the original text, I would add refugee to that as well, with the Semitic sounding name, triumphs over the modern city and its various social and industrial complexes. The price of victory is heritage. When he assumes the waspy guise of mild-mannered Clark Kent, the persona that enables him to infiltrate society, he loses his power and potency and becomes another nameless face in a crowd. Moreover, as a newspaper reporter, like Siegel had been in high school, Kent makes social commentary and can be an advocate for social change. However, he does this through the slow, limited means afforded by such channels as print media, while Superman affects instant change through strength, superhuman powers, and an unbending confidence in his convictions. As with any fictional character whose popularity grows to iconic heights, Superman's image has undergone innumerable modifications over the course of his 80-year evolution. Some of the more obvious changes are those that inevitably result from being portrayed by dozens of writers and illustrators over the years, each with his or her own vision of the character, not to mention the portrayals of the various voiceover talents and live action performers of stage and screen who have taken on the coveted role. Other changes include those that resulted from the broadening of the narrative and the resultant need for more characters for Superman and the object of his affection, Lois Lane, to interact with, including the doting copyboy and photographer Jimmy Olsen, their intimidating boss at the Daily Planet, Perry White, and later, Mary and Jonathan, or Ma and Pa Kent, Kal-El's adoptive parents who raised him in the aptly named town of Smallville. In the original narrative, the alien baby is found by a man on the side of the road and delivered to an orphanage. Smallville doesn't come around until 1949. Indeed, Smallville's location is never specifically identified, though its Middle American appearance led the producers of the 1978 film to locate the town in Kansas. And here we're looking at a famous scene from the sort of opening of the film when after Kal-El first arrives on Earth. But again, in the original, I think the idea was that Superman landed in the city, yet over time, the Smallville narrative, I think, became the preferred, perhaps to satisfy a particular audience and to go maybe along better with Superman's developing values. This decision is consistent with the larger shift that took place in the portrayal of Superman from his early days as a left-wing defender of the innocent and disenfranchised to the comparatively conservative post-war Superman, who gradually lost the radical edge he had been endowed with by his original creators and became, quote, an instrument of US law. Celebrated writer Dennis O'Neil, who actually just passed away in June, points out that Superman's image was changing even before the end of the war. Quote, Superman had grown more powerful physically. He had become more flamboyant personally, safer somehow, a scoutmaster in cape and boots. This Superman represents the shift from the champion of the oppressed to the later, more geographically specific but politically ambiguous defender of truth, justice, and the American way of the 1950s that came to dominate television and film portrayals of the superhero. This squeaky clean image came to inform not only the feature film version of the character for popular audiences, but also Frank Miller's casting of Superman as a Cold War era government agent in his genre redefining Batman series, The Dark Knight of 1986. Here, Superman's hardline, black or white, right or wrong mentality is contrasted against Batman's traditionally more complex and nuanced psychology. Superman was cast in a similar role in the recent award-winning limited series DC The New Frontier of 2004, in which Superman is tapped by President Eisenhower shortly after the Second World War to assist in the incarceration of superheroes who failed to retire or register with the Congressional Committee on Un-American Activities. Superman's obedience to American government authority is confirmed when he joins a relief effort in Indochina, in which both he and Wonder Woman are sent to stabilize the region under the guise of humanitarian activities. Despite the vastness of Superman's cultural territory and how thoroughly imbricated his image may be with popular American ideologies, Superman is also consumed by individuals whose unique experiences of the superhero form a small but nonetheless considerable part of his reception. Part of the difficulty in dealing with individual responses to Superman is the virtually innumerable ways in which a person may have encountered the action hero, whether through the comic books, comic strips, novels, television, both live action and animated, theatrical productions, film, or commercial products, to name just the most likely avenues. While this multiplicity is endemic to the very nature of icons and their ubiquity, it is further complicated when the icon is not a living, breathing human, but rather a fictional character whose every manifestation is an act of creation and reinterpretation. Moreover, none of the origin stories, no matter how complex, ever explain exactly why Superman fights for truth, justice, and the American way, which we implicitly read as democracy. This leaves us to assume that this intellectually and technologically advanced utopian Kryptonian society must have been philosophically advanced as well, as we would like to imagine ourselves, and thus enlightened regarding the importance of equality and individual rights for all. If we choose nurture over nature to explain Superman's unwavering faith in democracy, then the answer is quite simple. He landed in the United States and was raised in an American home, or orphanage originally, and learned American values in American schools. Indeed, the matter of the seeming arbitrariness of Superman's identification with the United States was broached in 1976 in issue number 300 of Superman. In this issue, the writers posit a then present-day circumstance in which the infant Superman spacecraft lands in international waters in the North Pacific, and the US and Soviet navies must race to claim the rocket, with the US forces narrowly winning. Such a premise was further developed in the critically acclaimed miniseries Superman Red Sun by Mark Millar in 2003, which actually now is a movie and it's quite good, in which Superman's spaceship lands in the Ukraine rather than in Smallville in 1938. Chest emblazoned with the hammer and sickle rather than his familiar S logo, Superman thus comes to be revered as the, quote, champion of the common worker, who fights a never-ending battle for Stalin, socialism, and the international expansion of the Warsaw Pact. As an icon with exceptional symbolic versatility, capable of representing extremes from mainstream nationalism to outsider alienation, Superman has been referenced frequently by contemporary artists to respond to the variegated terrain of the American sociocultural landscape. As Andrew Kirk has noted, Superman may simply be a comic book superhero, but his pop culture status endows him with a textually specific readability that necessarily intertwines with the life experiences and worldviews of those consuming him, which results in numerous interpretations and responses that are salient for groups of consumers despite being varied from group to group. Kirk cites John Fiske's television Polysemy and Popularity, in which Fiske explores the power struggle implicit in the struggle over meaning. As a result, Kirk maintains, consumers of popular culture texts, regardless of dominant or subordinate cultural group membership, or perhaps because of them, are able to produce their own interpretations for those texts, including interpretations that resist the dominant producer's intended meanings. This polysemy is a result of the various levels of meaning that can be determined as encoded within the construction of the text or decoded during the reception of the text, not to mention the intertextual possibilities brought on by the author's cross-referencing or other texts the reader must inevitably have in mind while reading. This semiotic excess, or the personal meanings that result from the interaction of individual reader and text, are, according to Fiske, would enable the culturally subordinated to experience the text in relation to the dominant cultural system. Each text then has the capacity to bear, quote, multiple meanings because of the varying intertextual relationships that texts carry, and because of the varying constructions or interests of receivers. By experiencing the text in this oppositional way, the dominant and the oppositional are simultaneously present in both the text and its readings. Such an oppositional framework has been used by numerous contemporary artists to identify with Superman, thus revealing the underlying structures of meanings and the power contained within them. So this was basically a kind of long and roundabout way of saying that it's really kind of in a lot of ways impossible to read Superman without bringing with it a significant amount of baggage, not only of understanding of Superman, but Superman's larger position in society as a kind of icon. But again, not as a figure who is not a real person, who existed in real time and has a history we can trace. We've got a history made up of many different directions and many different perspectives coming in, that we get to the point where some people begin to argue, is this information quote unquote canon or not? I don't know if you're familiar with canon. It gets brought up a lot in discussions of Star Wars, because with Star Wars, there also exists a very large and kind of multifaceted universe, some of which is from the original ideas of its creator, George Lucas, and other are from new ideas that have been, I wouldn't say sort of laid on top of it, but almost that we are looking through the various layers, that we can kind of see elements of them as we look through. They're being superimposed upon one another. The idea of the palimpsest here comes in, that there are these kind of like ghostly levels or shades that kind of, you know, help to flesh out the figure. This is something that's in another presentation that I do regarding Superman, but I thought it was useful here, again, in terms of thinking about the mindset of the person reading the Superman comic in 1959. This is from an attempt on the part of DC Comics to do something that they considered like multicultural outreach. It was called Brotherhood Week. Brotherhood Week apparently has existed for quite some time in our country, for a really long time, actually. And they decided, I think this was an opportunity to become part of it. And so there's a wide variety of ham-fisted efforts to try to, I guess, evoke a sense of acceptance and tolerance and all of that. And this is maybe the most heinous, the brotherhood quotient. Here's a detail of it. Just, again, you can imagine that this is being undertaken by individuals not only kind of lacking in nuance, but also I think lacking in even just a certain understanding of kind of what entails a demographic. And that in and of itself demonstrates this as a really poor social experiment, but a really valuable clue and insight into a 1959 mentality of what tolerance might look like, or at least the development of tolerance might look like, that one would, I guess almost kind of like sort of the cosmopolitan sort of, you know, romance quiz kind of thing that is not being put together by anyone who has any real sort of experience in assessment of of romance, whatever that is. So to look at some of the artists who've engaged with Superman, I picked out certain ones from the chapter that I think are particularly valuable and have a lot to say in relation to what I've just been talking about, but then also a couple that never made it in that I thought might be interesting to look at. At this point, again, you're welcome. I can't see any of the comments because I've got my, my show up here, but if Ted wants to let me know if anybody's got anything they want to add, that's fantastic. So one of the earlier examples that I mentioned in the chapter is this painting by, it wouldn't be recognizable to most as a painting by Philip Pearlstein because the style is so radically different. He's better known for his paintings of the late 60s and 70s and 80s that have, they are not painterly or expressive like this. They are very carefully, very minutely painted in and not of popular cultural subject matter. He deals with the nude and more traditional kind of subject matter. So this is kind of unusual for him, but it's also early in his career. But this is a really interesting one to me because, again, there's various levels of signification going on here. Because on the one hand, we've got the image of Superman, and in this particular image, he appears to be dividing these two exploding bombs, or he's keeping these explosions from maybe meeting or coming together to create some kind of larger explosion. And so it's interesting to think about what Superman in this particular instance is doing, because 1949 would be the first, I believe, the first successfully detonated nuclear bomb by the Soviet Union, which was the second after the United States. And then there were two more detonations in 1951. And so this might be seen as a sort of an early example of a kind of Cold War mentality or a Cold War aesthetic. But there's, again, many layers of appropriation going on here. And remember, I talked about this idea, kind of thinking about the sort of superimposing of images and ideas over each other, because I don't know if anyone recognizes kind of the source material for this image beyond Superman. If anyone sees it, feel free to yell out. But it's God. And of course, Superman is often described as God or godlike in terms of the sort of power that he wields. So is Pearlstein making a commentary, or is he sort of bringing up an issue that is a critical one in thinking about what it is that Superman represents, or what it is that Superman signifies in terms of this power that is godlike, and what that would entail in terms of his own values and his own belief system, and the importance that these are American values, and again, going back to that truth, justice, and the American way that has been questioned in recent decades.
Brad, I'm curious. Wait, I'm sorry to cut in. Has anybody ever made a connection to the Michelangelo piece?
Yes, I cannot take credit for that. That is something that was recognized by another scholar. No, I can't take credit for that one. But again, I don't think it's something that jumps out, because I think it's very cleverly, you're thinking more about the Superman element of appropriation and the reference that's being made there. Then when you read it in relation to that, it suddenly becomes a much, again, more nuanced image, and one with more layers that need to be unpacked. Any good postmodern piece, and I won't take credit for this sort of metaphor either, but they're like onions, because they peel apart. And when you take layer after layer off, you get more information and more information and more information. And it would almost be like an onion of infinite regress. You would never get to a center. It would just keep peeling and peeling, because you could always keep making more and more references in a very rich popular culture like the United States is. Andy Warhol, I mentioned at the very beginning, this was the only time that, or this was a moment where Warhol engaged with comic culture. He backed off of it for years because another pop artist, Roy Lichtenstein, kind of took the comic image and made it iconic in its own way. Warhol was always convinced that Lichtenstein took this image of Warhol's, because Warhol did it about a year before Lichtenstein was doing it. But he always, in his own, inimitable way, was kind of always like, oh, I never wanted to do superheroes anyway, so I just gave it to Roy, kind of thing. But this is a really good example here of thinking about an artist, again, maybe saying something or signifying something sort of semiotically through the image, whether it's through what you take away or what you emphasize, because it's not, yes, it's Kurt Schaffenberger's image, but it's not his exact image. It's a reinterpretation of it where, frankly, what Superman is thinking has kind of been erased to a certain extent. It's become very difficult to read, where all that really stands out is this giant puff in the center. And that puff, poof, is, I think, for Warhol, an important signifier, because in the early 1960s, Andy Warhol was coming out of a period in the 1950s where he had switched from being a graphic artist and a commercial artist to now a fine artist. Of course, he was breaking down those distinctions even just through his work at the moment in the late 50s and early 60s. But at this moment, he is fighting a very homophobic art world in New York. The sort of leading abstract expressionist painters are all of these sort of macho heterosexuals who express themselves through fighting and through violence. And Warhol had a really hard time breaking in with that group, and in fact later on chose just not really even to bother. Even the artists whose sexual orientations he knew, who kept them covered, like Jasper Johns and Robert Rauschenberg, said, Andy, your problem is that you are too effeminate. You're too, as they told him, swish. And it was something that, you know, he either needed to bury, or he needed to find or express it and find ways to express it. And his art was certainly one way to express it. And this image, the puff, again, puff being slang for homosexual or sodomist, being kind of, again, the focused on territory, I think is a interesting reading. This image, okay, this image is from a comic book called Superman's Girlfriend, Lois Lane, issue 24. And another story in this issue, which Warhol obviously had read because he took this, he actually has collages. You can see them at the Warhol Museum in Pittsburgh. And he had collages, and this image is collaged into one. So he obviously had this comic book or read from this comic book. And one of those stories I think that's also kind of interesting is it's not from the story that the panel that we were just looking at was from. It's from another story of Lois Lane, who she's always had it with Clark. She's always done with him, and she's always trying to go on to new guys. And she finds this sort of Clark / Superman, almost kind of like doppelganger. His name's, I'm trying to remember what his last name is. It's Roger Warner, I think is his name. Something, again, really kind of generic. And Superman, as you can see from the very top, he sees that Lois is about to have an amorous moment with this gentleman. And so he flies by at rocket speed, and despite the glue, still, manages with his, super speed to topple the toupee. And, in a kind of, sort of Delilah-esque fashion, he kind of at the same time manages to sort of neuter Roger here by removing his hair. He kind of Samson-like sort of removes all of his power and all of his allure. And in the end, Lois says, I guess I'll just stick with Superman, because with his powers, he's never going to lose his hair. So again, thinking about attitudes, thinking about how Andy Warhol, who in the late 1950s, by the late 1950s, he's had the nose reduction, the rhinoplasty, he's had part of his nose shaved off, which in 1956, which he had big hopes for. But that's also the point where, because of his male pattern baldness, he had started to wear a wig. And so you can imagine, as a person with male pattern baldness reading this comic and having that kind of infiltrate into their system. Here in this drawing from the 1950s, you can see him sketching what he's going to look like. And maybe out of a fear of that Roger Waters, not Roger Waters, not from Pink Floyd, but Roger Warner, who's again, has been outed. And of course, Andy Warhol, struggles with this public versus private persona. This fear of being outed is something that he sees expressed in a variety of ways, and outed by Superman, no less. This was a return of Superman to his work in 1981, a print that he did that, again, is another level of appropriation. But I want to move on to some other artists like Laurie Anderson, who is probably the least directly connected to Superman in terms of her well-known song and performance, Oh Superman. It's very available on YouTube. I highly recommend watching it if you haven't before. It's a part of a larger performance that she does called The United States Parts 1 and 2. But it's one of those things, who knows why, but it became a hit single in the early 1980s. It's not exactly something that, you can, tap your feet and dance to, but it's, very minimalist, and it's atmospheric, but it captured the public imagination. So definitely watch it, because I can't recapture so much the atmosphere of it, but she does use a lot of systems of signification in terms of hand gesture and vocalizations. Her voice is, as in most of her work, her voice is heavily distorted. It's made higher, it's made lower to play various different characters. And the fist is something that comes up regularly. The fist is force. And Superman to her is a signifier of force. Superman derives the "Oh Superman, Judge, Mom" comes from Massenet's song from his opera El Cid, comes from "Oh Sovereign, Oh Judge, Oh Father." So she's kind of reversed it as something where she looks at levels of sort of authority and power, from the sort of microcosmic to the macrocosmic, from mom, who's calling her and asking her when she's coming home and constantly sort of, asserting her authority, to the level of above judge, which is Superman. And there's this one really chilling moment where she talks about, here come the planes, they're made in America. And I can see the smoke rising. Do you want smoking or non-smoking? And it has, as someone who lived through, the events of 9/11, 2001, it's something that is very difficult not to see almost as an anticipation of those events, because there is that sort of fear of what happens when your own power is turned against you. And that's something that, again, the sort of fear of the Superman is what happens if Superman changes his allegiances? He's someone who may be subject to that. Where does that leave us? Roger Shimamura is an artist that I had the great opportunity and privilege to meet and get to know. He's someone who's I've been interested in his art for over 20 years. And he's been in St. Louis. He came maybe 10 years. Well, actually, it was right before I think I published this. So it was probably around 10 years ago. He did a fantastic talk at Washington University at the Kemper Art Museum. And I've had the opportunity to correspond with him. And he's someone for whom popular culture, and Superman in particular, has played a significant role in his work and in his own personal evolution in thinking about these kinds of power structures through the lens of race. He's born in Seattle, and as a very young man, at the age of about 3, he was, as many people of Japanese ancestry were, who are Japanese American citizens, was interned. He was put in the internment camp in Minidoka in Idaho. And that's something that had obviously a massive impact on his thinking, on his understanding of himself as an American, and his understanding of himself as a Japanese. And of course, this is not a moment in American history that gets a lot of press and that is talked about a lot, because it's an undeniably embarrassing moment in American history when being an American citizen did not mean equality. And again, I was thinking about what are the things that are applicable about this article to what's going on now. And if that isn't what is being discussed at a level and with a passion that we haven't seen in quite some time, this issue of, are all Americans treated the same and all Americans equal? Shimamura became really kind of obsessed with images of, very stereotypical images of Japanese. So he collected them. Whether they were quote unquote positive or negative images. For example, Jojitsu, who was a heroic figure and a compatriot of Dick Tracy, yet at the same time treated in a very kind of inhumane way in this stereotypical representation. But these are some examples from his collection of ephemera and various types of World War II era popular cultural objects that are in his collection. So where does Superman come in? It's like, okay, well, Superman was someone who was, as many were, athletes, actors, actresses, was put in service for the war effort. And you can see from this cover of Action Comics number 58, there was an authorization on the part of Superman that racism was something that was the course of the moment. It was something that was being put in place for the larger purpose and for the larger effort. And this is something that obviously someone like Roger Shimamura, who is growing up seeing Superman as this great heroic figure, yet at the same time, something like this might be in the window of your deli, that Superman is going to help stamp out the Jap Nazis. And here the Japanese and the Nazis have been conflated in order to create a more focused enemy. When you can focus on your enemy, it is much easier to advertise that effort. And what's really amazing is best wishes from Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, individuals who experience their own kind of discrimination due to religion. So Roger Shimamura incorporated Superman in his work, but not necessarily Superman as a protective figure. Here in this work from a series that he did called Diary, which is images inspired by his grandmother's diaries that she kept in Minidoka at the internment camp, the Japanese American internment camp. And here we see an image that is ostensibly of her, done in the style of 19th century, 18th and 19th century ukiyo-e woodcut print with those very flat planes. Just outside of the shoji screen, we can see the silhouette of Superman, oddly enough, standing in his kind of characteristic iconic pose, you know, that signifies that kind of confidence and strength. Here he's standing outside, and the question becomes, is he standing out there to keep others out in a protective way, or is he standing there to keep her in? And I asked him specifically about this particular image, and this is what he told me in 2010. When I asked him what he felt the significance of Superman was here in this image, he said, "To me, he stood for the then current omnipresent US government that called all the shots for us. We didn't question things like we do now. When Superman said a Jap is a Jap, the citizens of this country went along with it. When Superman said, let's put them in camps, we tacitly agreed. When my grandmother in her diary said, I am thankful to America, that sadly had Superman drawn all over it." And this is the quote that goes along from her diary with this image. This is a quote from his grandmother. "I spent all day at home. Starting from today, we were permitted to withdraw $100 from the bank. This was our sustenance of life. We who are enemy to them. I deeply feel America's large-heartedness in dealing with us." So you can see the complexity. You can see how this isn't such a simple issue of right and wrong and sort of, you know, the subordinate and the dominant. It's a highly nuanced image and a highly nuanced issue of who is the enemy, who is the friend, who is the protector. And I think that's something that Shimamura in this image is helping us to try to deconstruct and break down. I'll go a little quicker with some of these. Jung Yang is a Chinese artist who he was, since the age of 4, was raised in Austria, raised in Vienna, and dealt with being an other his entire childhood. In his early 20s, he got a job at the UN, and he created this series that goes beyond just these images. There's also a movie and other parts of it, but it was called Salaryman to Superman. Salaryman is Japanese for like businessman or office worker. And it's significant that it's a Japanese word and he's Chinese. It's not an accident, obviously, on his part. It's because where he lived and where he was from and how people treated him, he was just lumped in with all Eastern, Far Eastern Asian peoples. And so the fact that he chose a Japanese title here is because he was frequently referred to as a Japanese by people, not really thinking about the nuance and the diversity of that entire region. So he started taking these photo booth shots where he wanted to create. He did for 20 weeks after work. I think once a week he would go into the booth and he would have these photographs taken of himself doing what he was hoping to achieve, the perfect transition from Salaryman to Superman, or the perfect Clark Kent to Superman transition. And the photo booth, I think, is interesting because it helps us think about where Superman does his changing in the phone booth. Again, something that I now have to explain to students. I didn't when I first started teaching this stuff, but now I have to explain what a phone booth is because it's not widely known. But what the phone booth means, that the phone booth is a kind of closet, and that the photo booth is also a kind of closet. So again, there's this sort of the closet as a place of change, the closet as a place of hiding a public versus a private persona. All of these things are critical. Andy Warhol used the photo booth in 42nd Street for his famous series of images of Ethel's skull. But again, the photo booth meant something different for Warhol because of, again, this idea of it as a kind of quasi-closet. I know we're just about out of time, so I'll just wrap up some of these last artists. Mexican artist Enrique Shigoya is another artist I had the opportunity to meet just a couple, it was last year or 2 years ago at the American Print Show. There was a symposium where I was presenting and he was there. And it was a great privilege to meet him as well, because he's an artist that I've been looking at for a really long time. He's an artist who engages with issues of difference, obviously national difference, but also difference, cultural difference as well. And so he frequently pits figures from his nation, from his ethnic past, against American cultural figures. And so here we've got Superman, who's removing this kind of like almost Puritan kind of garb rather than his usual Clark Kent suit, who's about to, it looks like, engage with the Aztec god Tlaloc, who's a god of rain and water, like a regenerative kind of figure, who's like a heroic figure in Aztec religion. And Superman, in his like sort of typical kind of braggadocio, is saying, I don't know what hole you crawled out of, but I'm going to put you back in it, kind of thing. And, you know, that sort of John Wayne kind of blustery attitude toward difference that remains controversial. And in this particular case, again, talks about, you know, like here, seeing this as a monster. He said, I don't know what kind of monster you are and what hole you crawled out of. So again, seeing difference as monstrous is something I think that Shigoya is interested in. Here in this image, Superman now is flying out of this Spanish print of this is a kind of image of pillaging in the New World and a sort of takeover of native cultures in the New World. And Superman's flying out of that image with his sort of laser eyes going, and he's about to engage with a Mesoamerican deity, Nezahualcoyotl. Best I can do. I hope I didn't butcher it too badly. But so here, this is again an image of, he's a 15th century like philosopher king. And above him, again, are images related to European culture, like that constructivist painting above him, and the stamp from Goupil, the sort of dealer of the Impressionists. And so this figure is surrounded by all of these different references to the European kind of takeover of Western culture, both in North America and in Europe. And then here, a image, this is a detail from a collaged sort of series of kind of print images where Superman is walking along with this young Mexican boy who's talking about how, Superman's talking about how he intends to protect him, and the boy's talking about how his father, in his dying words, told him to go to America and make a better life for himself, because that's, you know, that was the way that, you know, he would find a better life. And here, Superman's sort of protective gesture is not necessarily at odds a lot of times with his actions and what he does. And so I think this is Superman as representative of the US government, which I mentioned before. He's kind of in a lot of ways become so deeply imbricated with American policy, be it domestic and foreign, that it's in a lot of ways kind of hard to separate the two. And then just two that I would have liked to have included in this chapter, but either didn't know about yet or didn't have room. This Polish artist that I wasn't familiar with, and I only knew this image because of the center. So cut off all the words, and all I knew was the image in the center of this like sort of Madonna and child type image, and her with the Superman thing I thought was great. Then I saw the words, but I could not translate them because they're Polish. And so my daughter and I yesterday actually went on the computer, not only to find out how to pronounce them, but what they mean. In the upper left is zmywanie, which means dishwashing. The lower left is pranie, which means laundry. On the right is gotowanie, which means cooking. And at the bottom is gry domowie, which is playing in the house. And so this image was put on billboards throughout Poland in major cities as part of an art exercise. And so again, we've got the conflation of appropriation from Superman to Christian religious imagery, but then also, you know, is this a single mother and issues of, you know, various taboos of society, all this kind of being brought in and read. This is from a series called Supermother, and she dresses in various different superhero costumes. She does a Spider-Man one, she does a Batman one, but I think that the Superman one is probably the most potent because, again, it brings everything with it that Superman represents and the idea of the super heroic. And then William Pope L., one of the most vital performance artists and activists of our time, who did a large-scale project that took 9 years of crawling on a systematic basis over a period of time, 9 years, crawling the 22 miles from one end of Broadway to another. And when you go from all the way from one end of Broadway to another, you not only are going a great distance that is heroic in and of itself, but you're also, as you go, passing through various different areas of socioeconomic vibrance, and you're going from some of the most heavily trafficked areas in New York City to abandoned areas. And so this effort, he has got a skateboard on his back, and when he has to cross the street, a lot of times if he has to go quickly, he'll pop on the skateboard and go backwards. But it's, again, that sort of idea of what constitutes a heroic act. This is almost kind of like a Herculean kind of thing, like the idea of the labors, that the labors are a way of vindication. And that's something that I, again, wish could have been included. And yeah, that's certainly enough, I think, looks at artists. If anyone has anything to say, I'd really be interested in hearing about it.
Well, I'll jump in. So Superman is, you made it clear that the icon of Superman has been used as propaganda almost since its inception. Is it still? Or is Superman still used in that way at all by the government, at least here or in other countries?
Well, I didn't go into this image because, again, you know, I didn't want to kind of go into a hole with this, but you bring up kind of the very topic of this idea of, again, what sort of constitutes heroism. And Superman kind of is the bar in a lot of ways. For Superman at 9/11 to be looking at a mural of first responders and showing deference to them and showing a kind of feeling of inferiority in the face of what their heroism is and their sacrifice. Mm-hmm. As the bar, he can, even in our postmodern times where we would feel like it's all been deconstructed, and we've already had Batman versus Superman where they've, you know, maybe covered a lot of these things and it's part of the popular cultural discourse now. At the same time, I don't know if there is someone who is a clearer sort of, again, why I think he's kind of fits in this discussion of icons is I don't know if there's anyone who's so broadly known that you can use as a way, as a meter for heroism, or to say that this person, you know, is braver than Superman, that everybody would know. And so, yeah, I'd say that it's something that will be useful for quite some time, as long as they keep making movies and comic books and all that, and as long as he continues to represent that sort of pinnacle of bravery. I think he lives on. In fact, at the end of the very end of the paper or the chapter, I basically point out that as long as Superman exists because of fear, as long as there's fear in society, Superman exists because Superman is there to protect and defend. And if there was a society of justice, if there was a society of peace and love, there wouldn't be a Superman. Superman was created by two anxious Jewish boys from Cleveland who saw the rise of Eurofascism. And of course, how much that informs Kavalier and Clay is, you know, is very apparent.
Yeah, and I do know that Michael Chabon spent a lot of time having the opportunity to interview a lot of these illustrators and writers from the Golden Age. before he actually even started writing the novel.
I was wondering, in movies, on TV, some of our real live Supermans, George Reeve, Christopher Reeve, have come to very sorry ends. Suicide, horrible accident. Does that only impact us as Americans in the view of the iconic Superman?
Well, like I was saying about how Superman not only brings with him the narrative of the comic book, the guy who came from here, the guy who did this, the guy who did that, anyone who has touched the legend can't ever get it off. It goes with them forever. And I think that is when that happened to Christopher Reeve, I think that was one of the things that made it so poignant, is that if it had happened to certain other movie stars, it might not have resonated in the same way. But because it was someone that we associated with this idea of the Man of Steel, we had him on this kind of pedestal. And then George Reeves, who came to a very tragic end as well. Something very, he shot himself, right?
He somehow committed suicide.
I think he shot himself. Yeah. And of course, the irony is that he played the Man of Steel. He played the man that could not be shot. And then of course, I think that's how he took his own life. And so, yeah, I don't think, because Superman is so big, and I think that is also something that people who choose to play him have to be aware of. And I think there's a lot of characters like that in our culture where playing them, you never completely take it. The costume can come off maybe to a certain extent, but I don't know if you ever really can completely rid yourself of that sort of residual connection now to something so much larger than any one individual or any one time period. Well, you're part of something really big.
Isn't that sort of the myth of playing the Joker? Wasn't it Heath Ledger and Jack Nicholson that the Joker was this all-encompassing, in a similar way that you're describing Superman?
And to a certain extent, I would even argue that the Joker has come to replace Superman in that regard, not only because because Superman has been done more, but I think that the Joker just resonates more with society now in terms of I don't think as many people can identify with Superman's hardline ideas of right and wrong. In fact, they are critiqued now, I think, more than accepted, whereas the Joker's nihilism and the Joker's desire for anarchy is something that I think we all can probably relate to a little bit more.
Interesting. Based
on what we kind of see going on around us globally and socially. Superman is a relic to a certain extent if you don't complicate him, because he's so confident in his beliefs about right and wrong that in today's society, it doesn't really, it doesn't intersect very successfully.
Yeah, Bradley, thank you. This has been really fascinating. And in terms of critiques and reinterpretations, I think that, you mentioned Watchmen before, and how that obviously wouldn't have existed without Superman. And another recent riff on superheroes is, The Boys.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's, where these superheroes are all corporatized.
Yeah.
And they're not really using their powers for good. They're using them for profit. So even some of the things that where Superman he's been critiqued, has been pulled into other universes, it seems, and made more blatant.
It's really been since my childhood in the 80s when I would argue that superheroes in the 80s probably weren't that different than they were in the 50s and 60s. I would say in comparison to now. It was really kind of in the 90s that the shift started to take place and people started to problematize and complicate and deconstruct. And it's really fascinating what people are doing with superheroes now, because frankly, it's a lot more not only entertaining, but thought-provoking and really, you know, they're much better stories than they were. The stories, when I look back at them from that I, you know, kind of watch with my daughter a lot, they were so simplified in terms of what was good and what was bad, or who you were supposed to like and who you weren't supposed to like. You never really got to choose, or you didn't play any role in deciding. You just followed the leash, you know, that you were being led on. And now with that greater level of nuance, there's much more opportunity to engage, and in the sense of thinking about, who do I identify with? Who do I really identify with? Because I don't identify with any superhero from, you know, the 1960s and 70s, because their purity of character and their ability to discern what is right and what is wrong is something I just couldn't identify with then, and certainly don't identify with now.
Mm-hmm. Susan, did you have a question as well?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just doing something. But, you know, the whole idea of the origin story, I've heard some 20-something say, I identify with Peter Parker because Spider-Man, Peter Parker is a guy. He's not, you know, he functions in that atmosphere. Whereas Superman, no matter what his origin is, he comes from another place to make our place seemingly better. I don't know if identification was a big thing for Siegel and Schuster, who, you know, ironically creating the superhero and never really getting the money they deserved out of it.
And I mean, I don't know if they probably never could have foreseen what was to come of this character. I mean, not many, I don't think at the time could have known, you know, just what would happen in terms of the growth of, you know, American popular culture and post-war culture and all of that. But in thinking, I think it's really interesting to think about Spider-Man and what Spider-Man represents. Again, the idea of the sort of everyman coming from a modest sort of background, and being someone who, like Superman, lives the double life, the life of the scrawny kid, but when he puts on the mask, he becomes, you know, sort of super powerful. But the revealing who he really is, this super powered individual, would make him a freak. It would make him something that society would reject. And so while, yes, I do see differences between them in the sense of Superman being really an alien, he's really an other in the sense of not being human. I see where they come together in their need to have public and private persona and the fear of being a freak. And on top of that, that Spider-Man also was the one through whom Stan Lee expressed kind of the manifesto of the superhero: with great power comes great responsibility. That was sort of expressed through Spider-Man, because Spider-Man was a kid. Spider-Man did not have the kind of confidence in his actions and black and white understanding of right and wrong that Superman did. Spider-Man was always second guessing himself, and always, and in a lot of cases, assuming he was wrong and apologizing. Like, he'd pop in, and he'd be like, "Sorry, folks, you know, I hope I did the right thing here," and then float off and hope that what he did helped. Versus Superman, again, that kind of unwavering confidence in his ability to identify what is right or wrong. And I think really what's been fascinating to me is in watching a lot of videos of law enforcement recently, and watching law enforcement have to on the spot identify who perpetrators are and who victims are, and how in many cases during these protests, it's become very difficult for them to make these kind of snap judgments. And I don't think that necessarily takes away from, in a lot of cases, the bravery and the selflessness of their actions. It makes them human beings, because they're not Superman, and they can't just land and automatically grab the bad one by the scruff of the neck and pick that person up because that person's wearing something or has a particular skin color or something like that we got used to with Superman being able to do and identify at the drop of a hat.
One other thing, I was so happy to hear you mention Lois Lane. I grew up with Lois Lane as my idol. I went into newspapers. She was the complete reason. I didn't know that she was a topic of scholarly study.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
she- Yeah?
Yeah.
Like I could find that anywhere. That's terrific.
Okay, so this, I get me your email and I'll send you the essay in that book about Lois Lane. Because I know how to get it easily. So
Oh my God.
that probably
will,
faster than you could. So just get me your email or whatever. I can get it through TED or
I
whatever.
will, and I'll send you a picture of the Lois Lane t-shirt on my door. I mean, I just love her.
Now to ask, and again, if people have to go, I completely understand. Do not, I will not feel any, before anyone does go, thank you so much for coming and talking tonight. So have a wonderful evening, just so I had the opportunity to say that. And to ask you a question, did you ever feel like Lois Lane was presented in an overly sexist manner with her obsession with marriage, with how she was often presented as kind of like the stereotype of the not very talented housewife, you know, like can't cook, can't do this kind of stuff? Did you ever feel that was like, did you identify with that? Did you want to help her from being perceived in that way?
I was a child of the 50s, so I would watch TV when I'd get home from school, and I saw her as the attractive, tight skirt, well-fitting jacket newspaper woman. And it was the latter, the newspaper woman, that appealed to me. So I didn't really get into later things about her.
And I'm probably thinking more comic books, which I think the Lois Lane comic books, there's no question, they were intended to draw in a female audience, because that was always the holy grail of the comic industry for decades, was how do we get women to read? And there were romance comics and things like that. But the Lois Lane comic was definitely geared toward trying to draw in a female audience, but it's just so funny to look at it because it's just so blatantly sexist and stereotypical about aspects of what a woman's desires and motivations and passions were. But maybe the television show was different. Maybe the television show got her better, or just did a better job of presenting her as kind of the modern new woman.
She really did work, unlike somebody like Brenda Starr. And in the newspaper business, I did interview Gail Messick, who named Brenda Starr after a socialite at the time on the New York scene. And Brenda Starr, you never saw her stories appear in the paper. It was just kind of a ruse. You never saw the completed thing. And I felt like that newsroom with Perry White and the copy boy, it felt like a real newsroom to me. It really was my inspiration.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Bradley, I just want to say one more thing. We're all thinking about masks now for obvious reasons.
Yes.
And it's interesting that, we talked about Spider-Man. Spider-Man wears a mask when he's Spider-Man, but Superman does not. And it got me thinking about that. And the only superheroes I can think of who, off the top of my head, who don't wear masks are Superman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman. And I think what they have in common is they were born that way. So people who are born with powers don't wear masks, and they wear some sort of mask like glasses and stuff when they're walking among humans. Whereas people who become empowered, like Spider-Man, or develop technology like Batman or Iron Man, they wear a mask when they're that person. I was wondering if there's any scholarship on that, or if I should work on a PhD thesis about this.
Absolutely. That I think that point you're making about how powers are derived, or what makes them the quote unquote freak, like what is it when they are themselves, or is it when they're not themselves? Right. And I think you make the point that I think that's a I couldn't think of a better way to explain it in my idea, because one of the things that's always been funny about Superman, and it's been joked about, for eons, is the Clark Kent puts on the glasses and no one recognizes him. And that's always been kind of this, it's a go-to sort of trope of, wait, where'd you go? Who is that guy? It's like, it's always been kind of something that people have sort of mocked because of how unbelievable it really is that not only would strangers not be able to recognize the difference, but the people he's closest to in his life wouldn't be able. It's such a, sort of kind of pathetic ruse that's going on. Whereas you could argue, okay, at least, Spider-Man covers his entire face or something like that. There's more effort being put into differentiating him from the other. But in terms of thinking about it with masks of today and where we're at today in terms of what a mask signifies. So we've been talking about semiotics and systems of signification and how a mask signifies, because in the superhero world, of course, it signifies, Batman in certain ways and other figures. And I don't know if anything has become a more complex signifier in our culture in the last few years than masks. It is fascinating how quickly the depth of the meaning of a mask, because to wear a mask now not only speaks to your
how do you explain
concern about the pandemic, but it speaks to your social, religious, political, even if you're not intending it to. You can't control how people are interpreting the meaning of your wearing the mask, and not only wearing it, but where you're wearing it, when you're wearing it, like what are the circumstances. We are making snap judgments now when someone comes to our door that we were never responsible, I think, for making at that level, when you're deciding based on the person's seeming willingness to cover themselves. We're just constantly making snap judgments. And of course, we've seen the stress that this has had on in the commercial world, in the world of shopping, whether it's grocery stores or these, sort of big box stores, where people are taking these opportunities to take the policy of that store and turn it into a political statement. And so, yeah, the mask has become a signifier unlike anything maybe we could have expected, but it's certainly evolving faster than we can even keep up.
That's a great point. A couple other questions down here, at least one other. How do you explain the popularity of Superman Red Son?
I think that at that point in the early 2000s, I think that people, especially after, stories like, it's escaping me at the moment. We were just talking about it. This is what happens, I guess, this late at night when you do this. Watchmen. Like, I think that Watchmen, because it was such a game changer, I think that it created a thirst in people to see their heroes reinterpreted, to see these people who face it. Like, how many more times could we see the person, defeat Lex Luthor, or see, the person engage with this? It's like, okay, now I want to see what happens if we take our hero and we try to experience him through this other lens, or try to think about, particularly in the case of the sort of later ones that deal with a more sort of political intrigue, to think about how our world might be different and might be kind of destabilized. Because again, it's after 9/11. So we have 9/11 happening and people thinking about that level of destabilization. And I think that it worked its way into all different kinds of narratives, not even just superhero narratives, but a lot of different narratives that started to recalibrate is the word I'm looking for, in terms of what are the tropes of a post 9/11 society. And they didn't seem to meet up with pre 9/11 society tropes.
We'll take one more question, I think. Susan, is your...
No, I'm sorry. I was just thinking. No.
That's okay. Okay. Well, Bradley, thank you so much for taking time to do this.
That was great. No. Thank you so much.
I didn't want to tell everybody
really
that
wonderful.
we might be doing this again with Bradley later in the year.
Ted, is everything posted on the website in terms of new events? Or?
No. We'll have that solidified within the month, but we'll have a number of speakers. One of the things I'm really excited about, one of the byproducts of this awful pandemic, is that we're actually decided to spread the campus readout throughout the entire year. So instead of relegating it to just the fall, and also because we had to reschedule Shaden, obviously, so he'll be in now we'll be doing something probably in April of 2021, whether he's here or whether we're going to have to do it virtually. But I'm actually really happy that we're going to be able to spread it out, and it'll give more people an opportunity to read the novel, which I just think is a tour de force of a book. And so, yeah, so we will have the presentations out there, not only for Library Associates members, but we'll have it posted on all of Salute calendars, and we'll be sending out regular notices.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Brad. I really enjoyed that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
I
Brad.
copy and
Thanks,
thank you all, Susan. I did copy and paste your email, so I've got
Yay.
it. So
Yay.
I
Lois
can send you
Lane.
that. I'm trying. I don't think I've read the Lois Lane essay,
It's
or maybe
okay.
I did.
It's okay.
Again, it would have been a while ago, so I'm going to read it again just to refresh.
Great.
Thank you. That was great. Bye.
All right.
Bradley,
Thank
can
you all
stay on
so
for a
much.
second?
Yeah, absolutely.
All
Take
right.
care,
Bye,
Ken.
Thank you so much.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
I'm gonna, let's see, how do I want to stop the, I'm going to stop the, oh, here's the recording.